Blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Margaret Mack, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 18th issue of the New York Times Business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And our first article is by Rob Copeland regarding Bitcoin. Creative bet on Bitcoin threatens to sink a whale. Michael Saylor thrust his software company into the center of the crypto frenzy. Now skeptics see signs of a collapse. Had you glanced too quickly at the crowd packed into Michael Saylor's Tuscan-style Miami compound, you might have assumed it was just another rich dude's party. There was all-you-can-eat Jamon Iberco, an ample Versailles-style ballroom with a DJ spun electronic music, and a row of friendly attendants collecting shoes at the entryway at a docked yacht, one of at least 3 that Mr. Saylor owns. Matters got considerably weirder at dinner time, however, when fluorescent green lasers shot out of the host eyeballs, or so it appeared to hundreds of guests seated around giant screens erected on the billionaire's lawn on New Year's Eve 2024. The screens plopped Mr. Saylor's visage into famous films such as Gladiator and The Lord of the Rings. He was edited into the action as a hero whose eyes blasted wealthy cryptocurrency skeptics, including Bill Gates and Jamie Dimon, the bank executive. "Buy!" cried Mr. Saylor's avatar, as opponents were vaporized. Bitcoin has attracted plenty of prophets, braggarts, and flat-out baddies. Of late, though, no one in the industry is attracting more attention and scorn than Mr. Saylor, a would-be magnate and accused tax scoff who in 6 short years has transformed his also-run technology company, Strategy, into a Bitcoin betting machine. Strategy's longtime business is selling corporate software to sort sales data into easier-to-view reports. This is now more or less beside the point. Mr. Saylor has woven a web of financial tools and borrowing agreements to funnel nearly all of Strategy's available funds into cryptocurrency, a volatile, lightly regulated space that has nothing to do with the company's traditional business. That was, on its own, remarkably bold or stupid, depending on who is asked. It certainly worked uproariously for a spell. Once a penny stock, Strategy soared to $474 a share last summer as crypto rallied and the company amassed more Bitcoin. As a share of the total world supply than the U.S. government's stockpile of gold at Fort Knox. Mr. Saylor, 60 years old, was estimated to be worth about $10 billion on paper, and given nicknames like Captain of the Digital Navy and more simply, the Messiah. On social media, he fueled the fire with incessant, outlandish posts that foretold doom for the U.S. dollar and advised the public never to give up on crypto. "Sell a kidney if you must, but keep the Bitcoin," he wrote on X. Eric Trump celebrated him at Mar-a-Lago. And yet that proved to be just the start. Over the past year, Strategy rapidly created and marketed a suite of investment products that purport to transform Bitcoin a notoriously jagged asset, into a safe investment for the masses. Mr. Saylor crisscrossed the world by private jet, using high-minded financial lease to promise fixed returns into the double digits to investors who buy certain types of the company's shares. He compares its safety to a bank account. Except, of course, it's a bank account that takes your money and puts it all into crypto. How Mr. Saylor's Strategy's executive chairman and owner of nearly half of its controlling share is able to justify his promises is complicated. And it's getting more so by the minute because his company's project continues to evolve in the face of the latest crypto downturn. The man who told everyone else never to sell Bitcoin has recently hinted that his company may do just that to meet loan obligations. Strategy has begun to borrow money not to buy more crypto, but to stash billions in US dollars. Roughly the equivalent of Heinz saying it's beginning to see the merits of Hunt's ketchup. To skeptics, and there are plenty, even among crypto enthusiasts, it was only the latest sign that Mr. Saylor is a plain old huckster on the edge of unraveling for all to see. Strategy stock now trades at 2/3 below its peak, a far steeper slide than Bitcoin. The crypto community is increasingly on edge that if Strategy, its biggest whale, begins selling, the market at large could tip. That would reverberate to more mainstream financial firms like Fidelity, Barclays, and Cantor Fitzgerald, which do business with Strategy, to say nothing of the scores of ordinary investors who bought into Mr. Saylor's Strategy sales pitch. Steady sales pitch. And it would certainly not bode well for dozens of other companies that follow his lead to load up on crypto, among them Trump Media and Technology Group. The noted short seller Mark Cohodes predicts that Strategy will inevitably collapse and dismisses Mr. Saylor as a preacher and a Jim Jones type. "We've stayed away," said John Van Eck, founder of the Van Eck investment giant and a crypto investor himself. "It's just publicity." Herb Greenberg, a veteran financial analyst, calls Strategy a quasi-Ponzi scheme in which current investors can be paid back only with money from new investors. Mr. Saylor and representatives for Strategy declined to comment for this article. Asked by CNBC a year ago to address the Ponzi chatter, Mr. Saylor responded, "Just like developers in Manhattan, every time real estate goes up in value, these issues more debt to develop more real estate. That's why your buildings are so tall in New York City. It's been going on for 350 years. I would call it an economy." The frustrated fighter pilot. For much of crypto's history, Mr. Saylor and Strategy weren't in the picture. The suburban Virginia company, originally called MicroStrategy, made its name before the 2000 dot-com boom as a vanilla data crunching firm that helped companies such as McDonald's analyze customer information. It had modest revenue and profits, but its stock became a darling as Mr. Saylor emerged as an omnipresent media figure. He had a colorful backstory. A heart murmur reportedly prevented him from becoming a fighter pilot, and a penchant for wild, often unrealized promises. For Forbes, in 1998, the year MicroStrategy became publicly traded, He predicted a day when everybody on the planet lives every hour of every day dependent upon our technology. To one employee, he mused of developing brain implants. As Washington City paper put it in 2000, Saylor is apparently programmed to never shut up. That year, the Securities and Exchange Commission rolled in with fraud charges, saying the company had jiggered its accounting to create the illusion of profits that never existed. Mr. Saylor and his partners agreed to pay millions of dollars in personal penalties, but neither admitted nor denied fraud. The company shares created Mr. Saylor laid off staff members, but built the company back to profitability as a mid-sized software vendor. Still wealthy, Mr. Saylor retreated to rich person hobbies. He ran an internet college, Saylor Academy, and combined 3 Georgetown apartments into one. One of his yachts made an appearance in the Urturage movie. He never lost his taste for experimentation. MicroStrategy designed software for iPads and built a business around scraping social media data. He also hoarded internet domain names, including Michael.com and Mike.com, both of which he still controls. But by 2014, Mr. Saylor and the company was again attracting negative attention. This time it was from the unhappy hedge fund investor who described Mr. Saylor as distracted by partying. The fund asserted to the company's board that Mr. Saylor had driven MicroStrategy into a pariah status on Wall Street and pointed out that the company held more than $350 million in cash that could be invested for higher returns. Flanked by lawyers, Mr. Saylor met with a group of investors and promised to spend more time on the business, according to a person present who asked not to be identified because it was a private meeting. Mr. Saylor also pledged to find a use for the company's cash. Changing course. He hadn't done much on that front by the time COVID-19 arrived. MicroStrategy still had $500 million to spend as Mr. Saylor retreated to Miami and began discursive poolside discussions with a neighbor and early crypto evangelist Eric Weiss. The two men have recounted in podcast interviews. Years earlier, Mr. Saylor had tweeted that Bitcoin's days were numbered. Over a week or so of chats, he changed his mind. He became convinced that the Federal Reserve's pandemic response, including slashing interest rates and increasing the supply of dollars, would debase the U.S. currency and give rise to digital alternatives. He was further hardened into that view by a lack of trust in existing governmental institutions, a common crypto tenet. Mr. Weiss suggested a small personal investment in Bitcoin. According to the interviews both men have given, Mr. Saylor surprised him in June 2020 with a phone call to announce that he had personally bought $100 million worth while Bitcoin was trading at around $10,000. MicroStrategy quickly followed. That August, the company announced it would spend the vast majority of its cash to acquire Bitcoin and to buy out shareholders who didn't agree. Mr. Saylor publicly characterized the move as an escape from economic slavery. Also relevant, MicroStrategy's main software business was struggling to sign up new clients amid the pandemic, with revenue at its lowest level in 2 decades. There is nothing necessarily unusual about a company using its balance sheet to fund outside endeavors. Insurance companies operate investment arms to profit off premiums before they have to pay out claims. while retailers often buy real estate. But this shift was extreme. MicroStrategy began doing just about anything to acquire crypto. It regularly issued new shares to the public and borrowed money at low interest rates. Any funds from either were swiftly invested in Bitcoin. It acquired $1.9 billion of Bitcoin by March of 2021, $2.9 billion 1 year later, and $23.9 billion at the end of 2024, according to filings. Mr. Saylor's vocabulary changed too. He began to publicly describe Strategy, the new name was officially imposed last year, as a Bitcoin treasury company. That's a fancy way of saying its purpose is to wholly invest in crypto. What could go wrong? The pessimistic view on Mr. Saylor and Strategy is not exactly hard to unearth. For one, investors are skeptical of Mr. Saylor's checkered resume. In 2024, he agreed to pay $40 million to settle lawsuits by the District of Columbia that accused him of evading local income taxes and bragging about it. He disputed that and said he had settled to avoid the continuing burdens of the litigation. Prominent investors and short sellers, including James Chanos, famed for spotting Enron, have repeatedly rung the alarm. Among their concerns are that Strategy's market's worth, which peaked above $120 billion last summer, has regularly been higher than the sum of its Bitcoin. That suggests that even if it liquidated all its holdings, it would be short of paying back shareholders, let alone the debt. Standard & Poor's, the credit agency in December, reassigned Strategy a junk rating. S&P has pointed out that in the first half of 2025, Strategy's $8.1 billion in earnings was entirely composed of rough price appreciation on paper of its Bitcoin rather than traditional corporate earnings. If Bitcoin goes to zero tomorrow, Mr. Saylor said in a December event in Miami, it doesn't matter whether I own 1% or 2% or 3% or 0.5% of it. It's irrelevant. More pressure is forming. The company's stock is down by half since October, when President Trump's trade tussle with China set off a 24% spiral for Bitcoin. The value of Strategy's Bitcoin holdings dropped $17 billion in the fourth quarter, according to company disclosures. As of this month, Strategy owes $21 billion to its lenders and preferred stockholders. It is on the hook to pay more than $844 million to investors in the next year. Bigger payouts loom. As soon as next year, Strategy's convertible debt holders, the ones who lend money for as little as 0% interest, will expect to swap into stock that Strategy had promised would be worth as much as $672 a share. If it doesn't trade at that level, it is currently around $171. Strategy will have to find money to bridge the difference. In the next 3 years, $5 billion of such loans are due. Mr. Saylor is already backing off his die before selling Bitcoin ways. Last month, Strategy announced that it had issued more stock again, but in a turnabout, used the money to begin to stockpile more than $2 billion in dollars as a safeguard. Its chief executive, Phong Le, said on a podcast that we would sell Bitcoin if we needed to, a move that Mr. Saylor separately described as rational. The company hasn't yet. Some are sticking by Mr. Saylor. To deny that this is the future, said Ed Julin, a former strategy executive, is the same as saying the internet is a fad. At Mr. Sala's villa on New Year's Eve 2025, there was no big bash to equal the last. One of the previous year's attendees recalled that Mr. Saylor had told a group that he would hold the next festivity only when Bitcoin reached $1 billion. It recently traded around $95,000. Mr. Saylor, long-term prediction of 13 million by 2045. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And next is an article on Netflix. This is written by Nicole Sperling. Critics just misunderstood Netflix, Ted Sarandos says. Ted Sarandos, the co-chief executive of Netflix, sent shockwaves through the entertainment world last month when his company announced an $83 billion deal to buy Warner Brothers Discovery's movie and TV business. The deal elicited a strong and largely negative reaction within Hollywood. It also upset the plans of Paramount, which had been aggressively pursuing a deal for all of Warner Brothers. Paramount is still aiming to buy the company, launching a hostile bid and threatening a board fight. Last week, Mr. Sarandos talked exclusively about the deal. He discussed the harsh reaction in Hollywood, why his company decided to pursue Warner Brothers, and his relationship with President Trump, whose administration needs to approve the purchase. The interview was conducted in New Jersey, where he was visiting to celebrate an expensive new production facility on a former Army base. The interview was edited for length and clarity. So it's been about 6 weeks since the Warner Brothers deal was announced. Were you surprised by the anger people had, including the uproar over the company's long reluctance to have theatrical releases? I think it was a lot of loud voices, but not necessarily a lot of them. I think a lot of it was folks who questioned, rightfully so, our intent with theatrical because we hadn't said anything about it. A lot of it was the emotions around that more than anything else. Interviewer: it seems to me that the response was from the rank and file in Hollywood. Response: if you take a beat and think about who's been building and who's been collapsing, it's the best news possible. When we buy the studio, we'll be releasing more movies together than we were separately. Our forecast is to grow the content spend on the combined companies several years out. So it's really good news for the town that we're going to continue to grow the business. On the Paramount side, between the $3 billion that they've already cut and the $6 billion they're proposing, those are real jobs. That's cutting back on production. That endless search for profit by cutting people, jobs, and making fewer movies, that's not our intention at all. We need all those movies. We need all those TV shows. Interviewer: so you were not surprised by the reaction? No, I honestly think there would have been reaction like that from anyone who was going to do the deal. What people would like to see is no deal, but that's not possible. There are two outcomes of this deal, and we have a signed deal now. What did Reed Hastings, the chairman and co-founder of Netflix, think of the deal? Reed's more in the build versus buy mode. In total, Reed is not an enthusiast about these kinds of deals, but he was very supportive of it. Can you take us through how it all began? Well, we've never been buyers. We've always been builders. I've said that pretty proudly, and it's true. Once the company was in play, it would have been reckless for us not to look at it. The opportunity to get into the books and understand the business model better, and what we saw there was that there's a real something there for us. Their products would work better in our business model, and our business model would work better with their products in it. And that was very telling for us. We had a lot of assumptions that weren't necessarily true. Interviewer, give me one that has proved false. Well, the general economics of the theatrical business were more positive than we had seen and we had modeled for ourselves. It's a healthy, profitable business for them. We weren't in that business not because we hated it. We weren't in that business because our business was doing so well. Interviewer, I think people are still skeptical about this new commitment to the theatrical business. Well, I understand that folks are emotional about it because they love it and they don't want it to go away. And they think that we've been doing things to make it go away. We haven't. When this deal closes, we will own a theatrical distribution engine that is phenomenal and produces billions of dollars of theatrical revenue that we don't want to put at risk. We will run the business largely like it is today, with 45-day windows. I'm giving you a hard number. We're going to be in the theatrical business, and we are. We're competitive people. We want to win. I want to win opening weekend. I want to win box office. Interviewer, do you regret saying that the theatrical business was an outmoded idea? You have to listen to that quote again. I said outmoded for some. I mean, like the town that the Sinners, in quotes, is supposed to be set in does not have a movie theater there. For those folks, it's certainly outmoded. You're not going to get in the car and go to the next town to go see a movie. But my daughter lives in Manhattan. She could walk to 6 multiplexes, and she's in the theater twice a week. Not outmoded for her at all. Interviewer, but Netflix as a business proposition has changed the way people watch movies. Fewer people leave their houses to see movies the way they used to because of Netflix. Well, you've got to give them something to watch, and I think we've got to take ownership of the idea that when people are excited to go out and see something, they go. You've seen it in some really nice upsides at the box office this year. You've seen it in our Stranger Things finale experience. You saw it in our K-pop Demon Hunters experience the people. You give people a reason to leave the house, and they will gladly leave the house. I would say one of the other myths about all of this is that we thought of going to the theater as a competition for Netflix. It absolutely is not. When you go out to see a movie in the theater, if it was a good movie, when you come home, the first thing you want to do is watch another movie. If anything, I think it helps, encourage the love of films. I did not get in this business to hurt the theatrical business. I got into this business to help consumers, to help movie fans. Do you think theater owners believe that? Well, I've got a great relationship with theater owners. Well, they just went to Congress to tell them how bad this idea would be for them. Like I said, there's only two outcomes of this deal. We're going to be the buyer who keeps Warner Brothers running, releasing movies in theaters the way they always have. That keeps HBO completely intact. It keeps Warner Brothers Television producing television, and it creates jobs. How much involvement do you expect from President Trump, and how do you intend to navigate that? Every conversation I've had with him has been about the movie business and protecting American jobs and American production. What I've come to understand is he sees this as an important industry. It's an industry he likes a lot, so he'll take a keen interest in it. He also made it clear that what he understands is there's a group who will approve the deal, and he's taking a keen interest in it, but in the context of protecting jobs and protecting the industry. How often do you speak with him? I've talked to him a couple times since the election. Did you see the Truth Social post he posted last week, sharing an editorial arguing that the Netflix deal is terrible and the Paramount offer is better? I don't know why he would have done that. No conversation we ever had was about any of the things that were in the article that he posted. I don't want to overread it either. So let's imagine the deal closes. What does Hollywood look like 5 years from now? There will be very healthy businesses because they're good businesses today. They just lack resources, and we can bring them the resources. We bring them the distribution footprint to make those shows even bigger and better. Will you relocate Netflix from its base in Hollywood to the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank? Will you be sitting at the famous desk used by Jack Warner, a founder of Warner Brothers? I'll probably have a space in both. Probably neither of them will be Jack Warner's desk, but it will be a beautiful desk. Tell the truth. You're doing all of this for the desk? Yes, it's mostly for the desk. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is on real estate. Immigrants fill gap in construction industry. This article is written by Rhonda Kaysen and Robert Jibiloff. San Diego. In 1976, Matthew Moore marched into the Roofers Union Hall in Orange County, California, signed his card, and at 19 found his calling. Within hours, he put on a pair of hot boots, climbed a ladder, and became one of the many union men laying the roofs of tract homes spreading out across Southern California. Only 2 days later, Mr. Moore, a native of the state who never went to college, bought a 3-bedroom house of his own in Whittier. That kind of work suited me right down to my soul, said Mr. Moore, now 69 and retired. I worked outside in the sun every day. Nothing better. It was also the kind of well-paying blue-collar job that once helped drive a strong middle-class economy and has largely vanished. It's work that many Americans want to see restored. In the decade since Mr. Moore walked into that union hall, an enormous demographic shift has transformed his industry. In the 1970s and 1980s, the share of foreign-born workers in construction was the same as in other industries. But that quickly changed. Today, that share is nearly twice as high as in other jobs. An oft-repeated explanation for this sea change is that immigrants took jobs from Americans while, somewhat paradoxically, Americans no longer wanted to do the back-breaking work required to build a house. But a review of data and historical records, as well as interviews with many people who work in or study construction, tell a different story. First, construction jobs became less desirable as eroding wages and working conditions diminished the quality and job security of the profession. Only then did immigrants, with the encouragement of the political and business class, fill a gap that was already opening. Most of those foreign-born workers are not naturalized citizens, and many are undocumented. That leaves an industry of 6.8 million workers particularly vulnerable to President Trump's mass deportation effort. Builders are reporting labor shortages as some workers are detained or deported and others stay home amid immigration raids. And without workers, an already strained housing market will grow only more so, driving up historically high home prices and slowing the production of new homes. A pickup truck and a ladder. When Mr. Moore started his career, unionized construction was a good living, especially for workers without a college degree. In 1973, a quarter of workers were unionized, and in construction it was 40%, but those numbers were already starting to decline. The leaders of some of the country's largest corporations had recently formed a lobbying group, the Business Roundtable, to push back against the strength of unions and for weaker labor laws. The unions, which were also dealing with internal tensions, were unable to stem a tide that only swelled with the pro-business election of Ronald Reagan as president in 1980. Mr. Moore was young and happy to have a good-paying job out in the California sunshine. He spent his 20s laying roofs on houses and driving to the beach after work, a surfboard strapped to the top of his Volkswagen bus. In Southern California, the national labor fight came to a head in 1983 when the Carpenters Union went on a 4-month strike to block builders from using non-union labor. The effort largely failed, opening the door to a non-union workforce and marking a tipping point of a big dynamo for California's construction unions. They lost all their power, said Richard Denger, president of a residential framing company that closed in 2014. His father-in-law, Ray Cook, had negotiated on behalf of the builders in the strike. After the strike, Mr. Moore started seeing 2 worker gates, one for the union crews and the other for the non-union ones. So did Mr. Denger. Across the state, according to reports at the time, builders started bringing in non-union crews, leaving only commercial work for the union workers. Mr. Denger, whose companies framed tract homes, said that after the strike, builders offered him less money for jobs, and that translated to lower wages for his crews. The builders will only pay you so much, so you go along with it or you're out of business, he said. The prices of houses never went down even though all the wages went down. Somebody made the money. What was happening in California was happening across the country, both in states with a strong union presence like Illinois, Massachusetts, and New York, and those that prohibited mandatory union membership. Right-to-work states like Arizona, Florida, and Texas, where the population and housing production was booming. The share of construction workers in a union began to decline precipitously, and even an effort to recruit foreign-born members could not stave off the losses. As of 2024, 9 of 10 workers in the construction industry were non-union. And with that decline in union strength became a decline in the economic standing for both union and non-union workers. In 1973, the average union construction worker made $1.71 for every dollar the average American worker earned hourly. Today, union construction workers earn $1.15 for every $1 an American worker earns. And non-union construction workers make just 86 cents for every dollar earned by the average American worker, often without health or retirement benefits. By us opening the door to the non-union sector, basically we shot ourselves in the foot, said James Hodel, international president of the United Union of Roofers, Waterproofers, and Allied Workers. All it takes is a pickup truck and a ladder, and that's what we're competing against. No other way to survive. After 1 week of tearing roofs off houses in San Diego in 1991, Mariano Martinez was so sore he didn't think he could do the work. I said, "I want to quit. I don't think I'm going to make it." Mr. Martinez, now 51, recalled. Then, 19 years old and originally from Mexico, he spoke almost no English and knew nothing about construction. After 3 months, he learned how to lay a roof, and his pay jumped to $100 a day in cash without benefits. Mr. Martinez never looked for a union job. He had heard that the pay was better, but that you weren't always sure when you would have work. He stayed so busy that by 1999, he bought a 3-bedroom home in Oceanside for $180,000. After his son joined the Army, Mr. Martinez became a citizen in 2024. Mr. Martinez had arrived in the United States on the cusp of a major immigration boom. Workers interviewed for this article who crossed illegally during that period described a southern border that was more porous, even as barriers were going up. With the help of smugglers, many managed to get across on foot or in vehicle, and a common practice that continues today. Builders avoided knowing hiring undocumented workers by keeping laborers off their payrolls, and instead hiring subcontractors or labor brokers who employed the workers. In the 1990s and early 2000s, residential construction was booming in places like Atlanta, Phoenix, and Houston. Many immigrants, often from Mexico, slipped across the border and headed straight to those fast-growing cities as demand for workers soared. While the number of American-born construction workers rose, the number of immigrant workers increased much more, all against the backdrop of falling union membership. In Orange County, Mr. Moore began to see his generation of American-born unionized roofers leave the industry. They all just disappeared, he said. One day in 2000, he looked out at his job site and realized he was the only worker on the roof who wasn't an immigrant. By then, the high demand for housing and fewer worker protections had led to tough working conditions. For Mario, 47, who first came to the United States in 1997, from Mexico as a teenager, roofing paid better than picking cucumbers and bell peppers. But it wasn't easy. Mario was an adult by the time he started roofing, But many undocumented roofers are minors doing one of the deadliest jobs in the country, usually without health insurance. Mario, who requested to use just his first name, was not to disclose his employer because he is in the country under temporary protected status. Worked from dawn to dusk, sometimes 7 days a week. He was earning $800 a week, not much more than what Mr. Martinez had earned a decade earlier. But he had recently moved in with his girlfriend, now his wife, and wanted to start a family. There was no other way to survive, Mario said in Spanish. Unlike Mr. Martinez, who owns a home and has U.S. citizenship, Mario still rents and has a precarious legal status. Mario and Mr. Martinez were lucky enough to keep working through the Great Recession. From 2008 to 2011, the industry lost 1.7 million jobs, or a quarter of its workforce. Mario, who by then had 2 children, saw his income fall by 1/3. Mr. Martinez watched friends lose their jobs and their homes. But as a foreman who had been with the same company for years, he had enough work to weather the downturn. Mr. Moore, who had sustained several serious injuries from falls, including a broken back and pelvis, retired. Like thousands of other American-born workers of his generation. My back finally blew out, he said, but thanks to this decade spent working union jobs, I had more than enough hours for a pension. Immigrants who held on to their jobs say they have seen no meaningful wage gains in decades and are still making today what they made before the Great Recession. A shortage of workers and houses. The share of immigrants in the construction sector was last as high as it is today in the 1920s, when there were strong anti-immigrant policies. The Great Depression followed, accelerating the labor movement that would transform American work for half a century. Critics of permissive immigration policies argue that the supply of underpaid workers suppresses wages. But unlike in America after the Great Depression, it's unclear who would fill the gap in the construction industry should those workers leave. Today, the industry is short 300,000 workers, according to the National Association of Home Builders. Estimates put the national housing shortage somewhere between 1.4 million and 5 million homes. Without enough workers, building and repairing homes could take longer and cost more, driving up prices for home buyers and owners. A mass deportation policy that isn't paired with a way to expand domestic workforce or to make the jobs appealing again to American-born workers could leave the industry hollowed out. Adam Cook, who owns the roofing company in San Diego where Mr. Martinez works, says American-born workers, including the grown children of his longtime immigrant employees, may spend a summer or a few days roofing for extra money, but generally do not stay on the job long, often leaving for college or other opportunities. Decades ago, strong unions trained generations of workers through on-the-job apprentice programs that provided young workers with job security and benefits. With unions decimated, there are far fewer apprenticeships available, and builders have not filled the void with a robust alternative. Instead, young Americans have increasingly gone to college, moving into white-collar jobs. And among those without a degree, millions fewer are working in manufacturing and construction, and more are working in service and sales jobs. I'm interrupting this article to say you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Now, back to the article. Supporters of stricter immigration policies argue that deportation would open up new jobs for Americans and drive up wages. But research has shown that aggressive deportation policies don't increase jobs for citizens, but instead lead to fewer construction jobs across the industry simply because work slows as fewer homes are built. The idea that there are American workers waiting in the wings means you don't understand the demographics of the construction workers, said Natasha Eastlander, a professor of urban planning and public service at NYU. As immigration crackdowns expand, builders and workers are feeling the pressure. Immigrants interviewed for this article, including Mario, said some workers are skipping work, fearing a raid. Without a full crew, projects are taking longer to complete. He said Mr. Cook, 54, said some of his workers, regardless of their immigration status, refuse to take jobs near the Mexican border, fearing being detained, and his safety training sessions focus on immigration raids. They're basically moving targets, he said. A survey conducted last summer by the Associated General Contractors of America, a trade group, found that labor shortages are the leading cause of construction delays, and that the overwhelming majority of contractors were struggling to find qualified workers. Mr. Cook's customers, mainly San Diego homeowners, have been paying more for their roofs since the pandemic drove up the cost of materials. A labor shortage could continue that trend. A roof that costs $19,000 this year might cost $21,000 next year, he said. It's just going to keep going up and up. And next in the Business Times, we have the column Shop Talk by Laura Kelly. It's titled Choiceful, a relatively new way of characterize unenthusiastic consumers, especially during earnings calls. Consumers can be finicky bunch, and every quarter executives at publicly listed companies must find ways to deliver coherent narratives about what they are doing and why. Lately, as consumer confidence has softened, company leaders have been attributing middling prospects to shoppers' in quotes, choiceful outlook. The framing is the latest spin that executives are adapting to justify lackluster shopping, said Sachara Kodeli, a retail analyst at Forrester. In quotes, choiceful is coded language for sales or units are down, she said, meaning consumers are either spending less at retailers or purchasing a smaller overall volume of product. Choiceful, a term that started becoming popular among executives a few years ago, has become even more ubiquitous in recent months. It was mentioned 70 times across 43 earning calls in 2025, according to a FactSet analyst of S&P 1,500 earning calls. That's up from 36 mentions in 2024 and 27 mentions in 2023. Last May, for example, Rick Gomez, the chief commercial officer of Target, said that consumers have been choiceful in their buying decisions. In November, he used the term again, saying that guests are choiceful, stretching budgets and prioritizing value. Tony Spring, the chief executive of Macy's, discussed the reality of a more choiceful consumer on the company's earnings call in December, using the term 4 times during the call. Executives at MasterCard, Walmart, and Costco have used the term in recent years too. Before that, executives uttered the term only occasionally and not always in the context of consumer behavior. A media executive used it in 2011 comment to the New York Times in relation to ad buying, and a Sears executive used it in 2003 interview with the Times to refer to the company's approach to sponsored entertainment. The first known usage dates long before the time of corporate earnings calls and media buys. Edwin Spencer used it as an epic poem in 1591, writing his choiceful sense with Uri change doth faith. But in the past few years, choiceful arose in tandem with a new dynamic. Miscadelli said, as corporations fighting to maintain their pricing power charged more for their products, consumers started buying fewer overall units. In other words, shoppers were often spending the same or more while purchasing less stuff. This has not been the end of the world for retailers. Many have seen profits rise even as total unit sales decline. But it does prompt a need to explain. Even when you're doing well, you still have to manage investors, Miscadelli said. When you're a public company executive, you're always scrambling, always looking to justify. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 18th issue of the New York Times Business section. We read from the New York Times Business section every Thursday at 11 a.m. Your reader has been Margaret Mack. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the USA Today. Following that at 2 o'clock, we have episode number 16 of Mark Twain by Ron Chernow. Stay with us for these readings and more.